Today, we'll be exploring the concept of emotion in depth. Emotion is a complex experience that involves more than just feelings. It's important to distinguish emotions from simple feelings because emotions also include physiological changes in our body. Emotion comes from the Latin word emovere, which means to be stirred up. Essentially, emotion describes a stirred-up state of mind, a strong feeling that affects both our body and mind. It involves disturbed glandular and muscular activity and plays a key role in increasing our energy levels. Crow and Crow describe emotion as an affective experience that involves a general inner adjustment, combining mental and physiological changes, and is reflected in our outward behavior. Similarly, Charles G. Morris defines it as a complex experience that causes physiological changes and shows itself through specific behavior patterns. In everyday life, we encounter many emotions such as pleasure, joy, disappointment, and grief. These feelings fall into two broad categories: pleasant emotions like happiness and affection, and unpleasant ones such as fear, anger, jealousy, and anxiety. Ultimately, emotion is a subjective reaction that usually comes with a physiological shift and leads to a change in how we behave. When we look at motivation and emotion, the key difference lies in their sources and focus. Motivation is driven by internal stimuli and pushes us toward specific objects or needs, like hunger motivating us to seek food or thirst driving us to find water. On the other hand, emotion is triggered by external stimuli, and our emotional responses are directed toward whatever has caused that reaction. Now, moving to feelings versus emotions. Feelings tend to last longer and are generally simpler, more sensory experiences. Emotions, in contrast, are outward expressions of these feelings and are much more complex. They not only arise from what's happening around us right now but can also be influenced by memories or past experiences related to those events. This complexity makes emotions a richer and more intricate part of our psychological experience. Emotions are essentially strong feelings that add color and spice to our lives, making our experiences richer and more meaningful. They aren't just fleeting sensations, they represent an aroused state within our body, often accompanied by noticeable physiological changes such as increased heart rate or sweating. But emotions also influence other crucial mental processes like perception, learning, consciousness, and memory. It's important to emphasize that with these bodily changes, psychological changes happen simultaneously, affecting how we think and react. Emotions are universal, every living organism experiences them, yet they remain deeply personal, varying from one person to another. One emotion can trigger a chain of related feelings, showing how interconnected our emotional responses can be. Another interesting feature is the quality of displacement, meaning emotions can shift focus from one object or event to another. When we talk about the psychological changes of emotions, there are a few key aspects to understand. First, emotions can lead to confusion, where a person might find it difficult to think clearly or make decisions. Alongside confusion, there can be blocking of memory, meaning that certain memories or information become temporarily inaccessible. Another important psychological effect is clouding of consciousness, where awareness and the ability to process information sharply is diminished. On the other hand, emotions also bring about physiological changes, which we can divide into two categories: internal and external changes. When we experience intense emotions, it's important to understand that these feelings don't just stay in our mind, they actually trigger physical changes in our body. This happens because of the autonomic nervous system, which controls many of our automatic bodily functions. The autonomic nervous system has two main parts: the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division typically prepares our body to respond to stress or danger, often called the fight or flight response. On the other hand, the parasympathetic division helps to calm our body down and conserve energy, often referred to as the rest and digest state. Together, these two systems help regulate how our body reacts internally when we go through emotional experiences. The sympathetic nervous system plays a crucial role in preparing our body for emergency situations or heightened states of arousal. When activated, it triggers the release of hormones like adrenaline and noradrenaline into the bloodstream. Adrenaline then travels throughout the body, causing several significant changes. For example, it increases blood pressure and heart rate, and it can alter how we breathe, either speeding it up or slowing it down. It also causes our pupils to dilate, makes us sweat, and reduces saliva production. At the same time, adrenaline boosts blood sugar levels, providing more energy to respond to the situation. It also slows down the movements of the digestive system, causes the hairs on our skin to stand up, and can lead to muscular tension or tremors. Brain wave patterns may also change during this state of heightened alertness. However, when sympathetic activity becomes chronic, it can negatively impact our health, leading to psychosomatic disorders. Prolonged emotional tension may translate into physical health issues over time. This is where the parasympathetic nervous system comes in. It acts as a balancing force, helping to regulate and control all these bodily changes, bringing the body back to a state of calm once the emergency has passed. When we talk about external changes, we're referring to how people express their feelings and attitudes beyond just words. One key aspect is changes in the voice, like shifts in tone or volume, which can reveal emotions or emphasis. Another important factor is changes in facial expressions. These subtle movements can communicate a lot without saying anything at all. Additionally, different parts of the body can show change, such as stiffness in posture or specific gestures. These nonverbal expressions often carry strong cultural meanings. For instance, spitting at someone universally signals contempt or disgust, regardless of culture. Similarly, throwing shoes at someone is considered a very serious sign of extreme disgust. These examples highlight how important it is to pay attention to body language and nonverbal cues to fully understand communication. The reticular activating system, or RAS, plays a crucial role in controlling our sleep and wake cycles. It also has a connection to our emotions, though to a lesser extent. The RAS consists of interconnected neurons that link the spinal cord to the cerebral cortex through the brainstem. This system doesn't just passively receive signals from the brain, it actively sends information back to the cortex. Notably, the RAS becomes particularly active during emotional experiences, highlighting its involvement in how we process feelings. Moving on to the hypothalamus, research has shown that stimulating certain areas within this part of the brain can trigger specific emotions, like fear. This finding indicates that the hypothalamus has a direct role in emotional responses as well. Together, the RAS and hypothalamus form important components in the neural network that governs our emotional states. Now, let's explore the different parts of emotion that come together to create our overall emotional experience. First, we have the subjective feeling. This is the personal, internal experience of an emotion, like feeling happy or sad. Then, there's emotional expression, which includes the outward signs we show, such as facial expressions and body language. Next is physiological arousal, which refers to the physical changes in our body, like an increased heart rate or sweating, that accompany emotions. Finally, emotion interpretation involves how we make sense of these feelings and bodily responses, helping us understand what the emotion means in a given context. All these components work together to shape how we experience and respond to emotions. Emotional responses are not solely shaped by our environment, they also have a hereditary basis. Experiments with animals provide strong evidence for this. For instance, certain species like dogs, cats, and white rats tend to be relatively tame, which contrasts with wild animals that rarely become domesticated. This difference largely comes down to inherited emotional behaviors. One notable study involved crossing wild gray rats with domesticated white rats, revealing clear genetic influences on their emotional traits. When it comes to humans, it's more challenging to draw such direct connections. Emotional reactions are harder to pinpoint and measure compared to traits like intelligence. Still, while the evidence isn't as dramatic as it is for intelligence, there is enough to suggest that heredity does play a role in shaping our emotional behavior. This means our feelings and emotional tendencies are influenced, at least in part, by our genetic makeup. When we talk about fear, it's important to recognize that what triggers fear changes as we grow. For infants, fear often comes from basic experiences like losing their support, hearing loud noises, or seeing unfamiliar objects like stuffed animals or strange faces. As children get older, their fears become more complex. They might be afraid of being left alone, sitting in the dark, or even watching scary movies. Then, during adolescence, fear often shifts towards social threats, like worrying about acceptance or rejection by peers. One key point to remember is that fear is a learned emotion, it develops through experiences. Because of this, it's possible to control or reduce fear by gradually exposing ourselves to the fearful stimuli, helping to build tolerance and lessen the intensity over time through a process called behavior modification. Let's talk about the nature and control of fear, anxiety, and anger, focusing first on anxiety. Anxiety is a kind of vague fear that we experience without always understanding the exact reason behind it. One important cause is unconscious memory. Sometimes, a fear rooted in childhood gets stored deep in our unconscious mind, a process known as repression. This hidden memory can trigger anxiety without us realizing why. Another cause is stimulus generalization. This happens when we learn to respond fearfully to a specific situation and then start applying that response to all similar situations, even when it might not be necessary. These anxiety responses often create internal conflicts that can affect our well-being. Thankfully, managing these feelings often involves proper counseling and psychotherapy, tailored to the individual's needs and the severity of their anxiety. This approach helps address the root causes and provide strategies to regain control. When we talk about anger, it's important to recognize that it often arises from any interference with our goal-directed activities. This response starts very early in life. Even infants show anger when their actions are restricted, like when something is taken away from them, their face is wiped, they're left alone, or lose the attention of adults. As children grow, the sources of anger can shift to social frustrations such as feeling misunderstood, experiencing sarcasm, or dealing with bossy behavior. Interestingly, anger is something we generally prefer not to see in others, and society teaches us to suppress it. We learn to hide our anger because showing it openly can make others uncomfortable. However, anger serves an important function as a temporary motivator. It signals that something is wrong and needs to be addressed. If we don't express or release this anger appropriately, it can build up and lead to ongoing feelings of frustration. Understanding this nature of anger helps us manage it better and find healthier ways to cope. When we talk about theories of emotion, we're really exploring ideas that help us understand how emotions work, especially how our bodily changes connect to what we feel inside. These theories aim to explain and categorize our emotional experiences in a way that makes sense. One key theory is the James Lange theory, proposed by the American psychologist Carl Lange back in the 19th century. This theory suggests that emotions actually come from our perception of bodily changes. For example, we don't cry because we feel sorry, instead, we feel sorry because we cry. Similarly, we feel angry because we strike, and fearful because we tremble. In other words, bodily reactions happen first, and then the emotion follows as a result of noticing those changes in our body. This flips the common idea that emotions come first and cause the physical reaction. It's the other way around according to James Lange. This perspective highlights the close link between our physical state and our emotional experiences. The Cannon-Bard theory gives us an interesting perspective on how emotions and bodily responses work. Proposed by Walter Cannon and Philip Bard back in the 1920s, this theory suggests that emotions and physical reactions happen at the same time, independently of each other. This means that your body's changes, like increased heart rate or sweating, are not the direct cause of your emotional experience. Instead, both the feeling of emotion and the physical response are triggered simultaneously. Importantly, this theory highlights the vital role of the hypothalamus in processing emotions, emphasizing its influence in how we experience feelings. This approach challenges earlier ideas that bodily responses alone drive our emotions, showing us a more complex interaction happening inside the brain.